Joining us now, National Security Adviser Jake Sullivan. Jake, welcome back to Fox News Sunday. Good to have you here today. I'd like to start with this. Sources are telling us that Russia is now, quote, 70% ready to launch an invasion in Ukraine because they are now, or will soon be, upwards of 130,000 troops and significant new presence of jets, missiles, anti-aircraft equipment in Russia and in Belarus, north of Ukraine. But the U.S. and Ukraine have sent mixed signals on whether or not they think that an invasion will actually happen. So what can you tell us this morning? Is an invasion imminent?
Well, what I can tell you, Martha, is that we are in the window. Any day now, Russia could take military action against Ukraine, or it could be a couple of weeks from now, or Russia could choose to take the diplomatic path instead. The key thing is that the United States needs to be and is prepared for any of those contingencies in lockstep with our allies and partners. We have reinforced and reassured our allies on the eastern flank. We have united the West. We have provided material support to Ukraine, all at President Biden's direction. And we have also offered Russia a diplomatic path if they choose to take it. If war breaks out, it will come at an enormous human cost to Ukraine, but we believe that based on our preparations and our response, it will come at a strategic cost to Russia as well.
Yes, I mean, that's what we're learning. According to Chairman of Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, they're saying that Kiev could fall within 72 hours if there is an invasion, that 50,000 people could be killed. What do you think is the likelihood that there's a surprising quick fall of Kiev?
Look, my job here is not to predict what exactly will happen day to day. It is to prepare for any contingency, including a contingency where Russian forces drive on the Ukrainian capital. We are working hard with our allies and partners on that. We are providing, as I said before, material support to the Ukrainians and trying to get them to make sure they are in the best position possible to defend themselves. So the Russians have a lot of options available to them, but of course, we have options available to us in terms of the swift and severe economic consequences that we can impose, the ways in which we can strengthen and fortify our presence on NATO territory and NATO countries, and of course, the global diplomatic isolation that Russia would face should it choose to proceed.
But I think everyone, it's fresh in everyone's memory, the quicker than expected fall of Kabul in Afghanistan. So I guess my question is, when you've got troops, U.S. troops that are sent to NATO states, but none sent to Ukraine, I mean, that's a real possibility that we could be sitting here talking in a few weeks and saying, gee, that was faster than we expected, but we don't have anybody in country, and too bad.
The president has been clear for months now that the United States is not sending forces to start a war or fight a war with Russia in Ukraine. We have sent forces to Europe to defend NATO territory. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend our NATO allies, Poland and Romania and the Baltic states. We have made that commitment to them. We will keep that commitment to them. What we can do for the Ukrainians is not send American troops to fight in a war in Ukraine, but we can send defensive assistance, which we have done to the tune of more than $500 million over the course of the past year. And we can provide other forms of support alongside our allies and partners. We have done that as well. We have been clear from the start about the steps that we are prepared to take, and whatever action Russia undertakes next, the United States is ready.
Is it likely that what comes out of this, the diplomatic angle, is being pursued, obviously? Is it likely that we're going to see an arms treaty, a situation where Russia starts negotiating with us? We've heard there already talks about moving some of our Tomahawk missiles and a reciprocal move from their side. Is that a likely outcome here? And would it be a scenario where Vladimir Putin could say, gee, I got what I wanted?
Well, we've been very clear, President Biden directly to President Putin, Secretary Blinken in meetings with his counterpart just in the last couple of weeks, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, that we're prepared alongside our allies and partners to negotiate issues of mutual concern when it comes to European security. And yes, that would include reciprocal limitations on the placement of offensive missiles. It would include greater transparency measures. It would include mechanisms to reduce the possibility of mistake or escalation if there are incidents at sea or in the air. We're prepared to do all of that, just as we have been over the course of the past decades in the Cold War and after. If Russia wants to sit at the table and do that, we are prepared to come flanked by allies and partners and negotiate an outcome along those lines. If Russia chooses to go a different path, we're ready for that too.
Why not move more of our troops from Germany? Germany has really been on the sidelines in this. They have large energy deals with Russia. They're not giving any lethal aid to Ukraine. So we have 30 to 50,000 troops in Germany. I think a lot of people look at this situation and they remember some of the proposals in the prior administration and say, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we moving those troops to NATO, to our stronger allies than Germany at this moment?
Well, first of all, we have been coordinating closely with Germany in advance of the Chancellor's visit to Washington tomorrow on a swift and severe package of sanctions that the United States and Europe would both impose on Russia in the event of an invasion of Ukraine. And Germany has been working with us on that. Second, while it's true that Germany has not sent arms to Ukraine after the United States, they are the second largest donor to Ukraine in Europe. The great thing, Martha, about having the kind of alliance we have with 30 NATO allies is that different allies step up to take different pieces of this. So we and the UK and some of the other countries are supplying weapons. And then there are other allies who are providing different forms of support to Ukraine. But the bottom line is this. The reason that we are able to swiftly move a battalion into Romania to reinforce and reassure our ally Romania is because those forces were stationed in Germany. Having forces stationed in Germany is in fact a strategic asset to the United States because not only can they help defend German territory, but they can be moved to our allies in the East to reinforce, reassure, and deter Russia. And that puts the United States in a stronger position to stand up to Russian military aggression.
I know you've said that, you know, the larger goal is that the United States and our allies are stronger on the world stage and that Russia and, of course, China as well are weaker on the world stage. But how did it serve that goal to remove opposition to Nord Stream 2? Because now we're in a position where we're hoping that maybe it can be turned off if an invasion happens. But if we had held fast in opposition to Nord Stream 2, wouldn't we have denied Vladimir Putin some of the leverage that he now clearly has?
Nord Stream 2 is leverage for us, not leverage for Vladimir Putin. You said turn off Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 hasn't been turned on. There is no gas flowing through Nord Stream 2 right now, and there won't be for months, in part because of the diplomacy of the United States. And we have been absolutely clear that if Russia invades Ukraine, one way or the other, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward. That's leverage for us that we have right now. So we intend to use that leverage, and Vladimir Putin has a choice to make. If he chooses to move on Ukraine, he will not be getting the benefits of Nord Stream 2.
And Germany has agreed to that. Germany's agreed that, I know they've given an extension for a few months, but do you really think that Germany will not turn that pipeline on if Russia invades, you know, for the foreseeable future?
What I believe is that we will follow through on the clear and definitive statement we have made as the Biden administration. One way or the other, if Russia invades Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
Why not reopen the Keystone Pipeline and reopen federal leases on U.S. land? Because we had energy independence, and that was a large leverage for the United States over Russia. Now we don't have that anymore. In fact, we now buy more fuel from Russia than we have in the past. So why wouldn't you want to revisit those in order to increase our leverage over Russia?
Well, first, Martha, the United States is still a substantial producer of energy. Second, we have worked with partners around the world to take steps to ensure that Russia's attempts to use energy as a weapon get frustrated. One of the things that President Biden has been very focused on is making sure that if Putin turns down the supply of gas to Europe, that we can find cargoes of liquefied natural gas going elsewhere in the world and redirect them to Europe. So the United States is prepared for a contingency in which Russia
But you do concede that we're no longer energy independent, Jake, and we were before.
What I would say is that the United States is investing massively in being a leader in an energy transition in which, yes, for now, we continue to use fossil fuels, but over the course of years and decades, we become a clean energy superpower because that ultimately is not just where the jobs are. It's where the strategic advantage will lie, because we can't just look at next year or the year after. That's not what China's doing. We have to look out 10, 20, 30 years. And over those years, President Biden's investments and his vision for how to make the United States the world's clean energy superpower, that's what's going to put us in the best strategic position alongside democratic, like-minded allies and partners.
Well, I mean, some might say that Russia and China would look at that answer and feel that they're in a pretty good position. They came out and said, you know, we have a deep friendship. We have an unshakable alliance now. The two of us are in lockstep. What's the White House reaction to that statement from them on Friday?
Well, first, Martha, they didn't use the word alliance. They used some other phrases, but did not actually go so far as to call themselves allies.
Well, let me just put this up on the screen for you. It says a
that
friendship between the two states has no limits. There are no forbidden areas of cooperation. They also suggested that China would have Russia's back on their decisions with regard to Ukraine, and the same would be true for Russia of China's decisions with regard to Taiwan. That sounds like an alliance.
5,000 words of that statement and 5,000 words that the two leaders put down on that paper, the word Ukraine does not appear, which suggests that China is not so excited about cheerleading Russia on Ukraine. But there's a more important point here, which is that the United States, the West, the free world, we need to believe in ourselves. We need to have confidence in ourselves. The U.S. and the West collectively comprise more than half the world's GDP. Russia and China comprise less than 20%. We've got innovation, we've got entrepreneurship, we've got immense capacity and human potential. And one thing that President Biden has done over the course of the last year is rally our allies in Europe, in Asia, and other parts of the world to stand together for a vision in which democracies will win the day over the years ahead, not autocracies. And we feel very good about the fact that we have that kind of strategic alignment and convergence with close friends and partners in the G7, in the Quad, in NATO, with the European Union. And we've already put points on the board, and we are ready for the challenges that lie ahead.
All right, we'll see what those challenges are, and thank you very much. It's good to have you with us today, Jake Sullivan from the White House. Thank you, Jake.